Good morning. Hello, everyone. Well, thanks for joining us today. I know it's a rainy day, so we'll have several people who will be streaming online. But this morning, before I introduce Caroline, we're so excited to have her join us this morning. As Rob and I were creating the schedule for 2016, Caroline was actually at the top of our list. Number one, because she's awesome. Absolutely. But number two, it's her passion and her message that really we're very interested in having you join us today. And, you know, many of you who are here, you are either HR professionals, you're hiring managers, and so with that, you're influencers. And so you're influencers within your organization. And so as we listen to Caroline's message today, I think what will be important is to not really listen in the context of our policies and what those currently are, but the possibility of what are some opportunities that we might be able to think outside the box. So a little bit about Caroline, and I'm going to actually get her bio out because it's quite lengthy. She's the director of New Mind Health and Care. She has 15 years of experience in mental health, in clinical mental health therapy, and also 10 years of experience as a federal officer, which actually I love that story. She also has, she spearheaded the newly formed Upstate Reentry Coalition, and she's active with Olive Branch Village Project, which focuses on economic development as well as reentry for employment. So TEDx curator for Greenville, which is awesome, we can go ahead and plug that. That's April 8th. So welcome, Caroline, and thank everyone for being here today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I am really grateful to be in front of this audience, and as I continue to talk, you will understand why. So my passion, as she said, is reentry. So who knows what that is? Okay, so everybody didn't raise their hand, so I'll talk about it a little bit. Reentry are basically the processes and transitions that previously incarcerated people and their families go through in order to reintegrate successfully back into the community. So knowing what that is, we recognize, why is it important? I mean, why? I'm not in jail. Why do I need to know that? Well, let me give you some stats and facts. The United States incarcerates approximately 2.5 million people. We incarcerate more people than any country in the world. So that's incarceration. What about parole and probation? That's another 5 million people who have criminal histories who are on supervision. What about county jails? That's another 1.5 million people that are caught in the system. So we're talking about approximately 10 million people who are involved in the reentry process. 10 million. So what happens to these 10 million people? Nationally, about 700,000 people are released each year. 700,000 who have criminal histories and who need to come back into society and need to be successful. So we know now what they need, right? So let's look at the upstate. How does that affect us locally? What's our numbers? Can anybody guess how many people are released in the upstate each year coming out of prison or have criminal histories? Just holler out. Any number. 30,000. Okay. Anybody else? That's okay. 10,000. About 10,000 people are released each year in our area coming out of prison who need to reintegrate into society. So, is that easy? Is that hard? Well, how we look at that is we look at a term called recidivism. And recidivism is the rate at which people who've been previously incarcerated return to prison. So can anybody guess, is that number high or low? High. It is. About 2/3 of people who've been previously incarcerated ends up returning to prison for within 3 years for at least a 2 to 4 year sentence. So why do we think that is? Anybody? Just holler out why you think that rate is so high.
Unable to reintegrate into society.
Okay. Anything specific that might be an obstacle or blocker?
Job.
Exactly. Employment is the number one obstacle and indicator for whether or not a person will recommit. So why do we think employment is difficult for that population? You think?
That is the perception that it is high risk for the employer.
Exactly. But research does not indicate that. So we believe something that the facts deny. Even in workplace violence, studies have been shown that the majority of those incidents aren't people who have criminal histories. They are people who may have mental histories, but not criminal histories. So they really aren't that high of a risk. So when we're looking at reentry, we ask, how can we fix that? What is going to help that population move forward? So changes in behavior, right? We want to make sure that people can think something different, they can believe something different, and then they can what? Do something different. And that's the easy part, because most people who come out, they want to succeed. They want to work. In the 4 years I've been doing this work, and in the 10 years that I've been a federal officer, I can maybe count on one hand the number of people that I've encountered who've basically said, you know, jail is my life. Like I know I'm going to end up back in jail. 99% of the people come out and they want to stay out. Jail is not fun. It's not a wonderful place. You know, some people have the concept that jail is free meals, and jail sucks. And if you don't believe me, tour one. You will recognize that you can't wait till the tour is over, that you don't want to be there 1 second longer than you have to be. So anyway, so what else fixes it? Family support. A person doesn't do time by themselves. They do time with their children. They do time with their sisters, brothers, mothers, husbands, wives. So it doesn't just affect one central person. It affects the entire family. The other thing that we can do is we can increase their achievements in vocation, in education, but specifically in employment and finance. So let me tell you a little bit about what a reentering person has to face when they come out. So I've done my time. I'm at the gate. Normally, I'm handed, if it's state, I'm handed basically a $25 check, a bus ticket, and I'm on my way. So I'm not giving any resources for housing. I'm not giving any resources for employment. I'm not giving any resources for anything on the outside. I do know who my parole or probation officer is, so I do have that information. So now, what do? Well, I go see my parole and probation officer, because that's a resource I have. And he or she tells me that I have to pay them to supervise me. They tell me that I have fines, restitution, whatever, that I now have to pay as a result of the crime that I was in jail for X amount of years. And then they tell me I better get a job. But I don't even have a GED. I don't know where to go, where to look. So they send me to Voc Rehab. They're going to help me. I go to Voc Rehab, and they tell me it's a 4-month waiting list. We have you. We'll get to you. I still need a job. I still have to pay for supervision. I still have to pay my fines. So now I'm stuck. I'm not sure What am I going to do? Well, that's where organizations like mine and others come in to say, here's what we have for you. Let's get you work keys. Let's skill you up as much as we can so that people can see you're more than what you've done and that you're ready to work. We work on the behavioral soft skills. So should you get an interview, you are appropriate, you know how to interview, you know what to put on your application, and we tell our folks, do not lie. If it asks, have you ever been convicted? Say yes. And they say, if I do that, automatically I won't get the job. And we say, yes, you will. So I'm going to stop right there and ask you all a question. When you see that on an application, and I know that you have policies and you're working with your clients, but I'm asking you, as Jen said, as influencers, when you see that, what is your immediate thoughts around that person, around your relationship with that person?
Look at how long ago and what it was for.
Okay.
Make any kind of decision about it.
How long ago and what it was for?
We don't necessarily know when it was before we're making a decision whether to interview them. That we're a little bit unusual. That we give credit for being honest about putting it on there. And then what we're looking for, if we try to interview them, is what was the defining moment in their life that turned them, and why should we expect they're going to be different forward.
Okay. And I like that positioning. So tell me what time is relevant.
It was in the last couple of years. We'll still talk to them and ask them some questions, but if it was something that was a violent crime, we're likely not going to want to employ them because of that. We can overlook marijuana and those kinds of things, but we just have to look at the situation. Because the company has some liability in it for negligent hiring. So we have to be very careful in how we look at it.
Okay, Jen?
Something that has always been important when I look at backgrounds would be the history. Are they a repeat offender? Is it something that was a one-time situation and nothing else has happened, or is it something they have a history of violence? And so that's something that if it's, because historically in manufacturing where I've been, the drug issue, unless they solicited around the school, we didn't really care too much about the drug issues. But if it was something we did care about was crimes involving violence, and if it repeated, if there was a history of that particular violence, that was on the radar for us.
So let me just, I'm going to take your question and you in 1 second, but let me just share in my experience. And again, this is my experience, and I can say it's been the experience of another longtime reentry provider, Jerry Blassingame. He and I have this conversation all the time. If you were to ask me what type of my clients have been most successful, have been the most motivated, have come out of prison almost fully changed, and understand when you come to an agency like mine, we're working on your emotional, your mental, your physical, it's a holistic approach. I would say my favorite two clients were clients who went in as teenagers for violent crimes. One did 15 years, one did 17 years. And they came out with a heart for mentoring and finding a way to mend what they did. They came out with a heart to be different, to make a difference. And so I just share that to say that people are not what they've done. And I mean that. It doesn't matter what they've done. We can gauge and Joe will talk a little later, and he comes from a law enforcement background, and so there are things that you do need to be wary of. But when we say second chances, that has to be across the board. And that's all I'm going to say is that when you look at someone who has done something, truly give yourself a chance to assess the character of that person today, because the stereotype is not the reality all the time. And I'm not saying for everybody, but in my experience, in the 15 years that I've done this work, that's just not been my experience, that because you have this kind of charge, it's a blanket exclusion. So you had something to say.
Yes, you and I talked about the bandbox, a national movement. Our company has on our application for people coming on board, have you ever been a felon? That does not preclude them. There are 4 steps they have to take, and we have many, as you said, who make great associates. But there's just one more step, and because we are an insurance product, if that crime had to do with embezzlement
or fraud,
that will preclude it. But everything else, we'll look at.
Okay, and you had something to say.
Kind of similar. We look at relevance to the job a lot too. I mean, if we're hiring for, a truck driver that's going to be driving by themselves, full time, a felony driving charge or a felony traffic charge or something like that would be something that would be difficult for us to overlook. But over, a drug charge or something like that, it would be different. It's not as relevant to the job.
So that brings me to June of 2012, the EEOC decision, when they won a class action suit for ex-felons, basically stating federally that it's illegal to discriminate against a person solely based on their criminal history as it pertains to employment. And so when that occurred in 2012, I got very excited. Because I was like, finally, yay. Not a whole lot changed for my population. And so I say that to say for those of you who are really interested in being influencers, for those of you who are really interested in possibly tapping into literally the resources that are there waiting to fill these positions, kind of think about that this is a marginalized class of people, that literally there's been some federal initiative to protect them in this area. And so whatever you can do outside of your regular thinking to help this marginalized group is key. Because the reality is, and again, I'm not saying hire a former bank robber as a bank teller. I don't think that's a good idea. But certainly that person, even though he robbed a bank 10, 15 years ago, could drive a forklift, could do something in manufacturing. I mean, and we all need to understand that everyone deserves to make a living. And that's the other option, or the other perception is that there are jobs that say, we don't care if you have a criminal history. Anybody familiar with Columbia Farms? Okay, it's a chicken farm. I can't do it. I could never do it. But they hire people with a criminal history. And while I think that's an okay place to start, I don't know that we need to say that's all that's available for people who can learn, for people who want to learn, and for people who want to earn a living wage when there are vacancies. Yes.
How, you're saying your program is different than voc rehab in what ways? They don't do it as much one-on-one counseling, or?
They don't work with the entire family. They don't work with the connected resources.
I have hired through them felons, and it hasn't worked out.
So, and here's what I'm going to say. As I said, they have a 4-month waiting list. So they don't have the time to give to people, I think, in terms of what they really need. I have a 470-hour curriculum that literally addresses life skills, communication skills, interpersonal skills, workplace ethics. I mean, literally, I do job coaching. So I try, and if I'm connected to the employer, which some of them I am, I'm constantly getting feedback. You know, so-and-so showed up 15 minutes late today. He didn't really have you're going to see me that week, and we're going to talk about how if you're not 15 minutes early to work, you're already late. Because, and so you have to, again, some of these folks have never had formal employment. Some of them have been out of the system for so long, and understand that there's a whole nother social paradigm in prison that's totally different. Let me just give you an example. I had a gentleman who had been in prison for 10 years, and his parole officer referred him to me. And we're talking, he would never look me in the eye. And I would send him on some interviews, and he would say, I didn't get the job. And he never would look me. And I said, you know, let's do a mock interview. And it was awful. If he was sitting in front of me, I would say, this is the most untrustworthy person. They won't look me in the eye. They're talking to the floor. What's going on here? Well, when I talked to him, he says, on my tier, if you look someone in the eye, that's a form of aggression. You could get killed for doing that. So for 10 years, he learned to deflect, and he learned to look away, and he learned a totally different style of communication that is totally unacceptable out here. I can guarantee you that no one at Voc Rehab is addressing those type of behavioral issues. And so I'm not saying Voc Rehab is not a good program, because what they do very well. But I've had the success that I've had because it is almost, the process that I use is almost life coaching. And so we look at everything that's going to make you successful. We try to build a complete package. So if, and in that leeway, I'm going to give you a story, and I'm going to ask you about this young lady, and then I'm going to bring Joe on. So my friend, her name is Kim. And when Kim was a teenager, she was unruly. She was rebellious. Her mom died, and so it was just her and her dad. And so she was just kind of like all over the place. So Kim started drinking around 16. Actually, I can point it back to a specific gentleman. So she started dating this guy, and he was bad news, and then she started drinking, underage drinking. And he beat her, and maybe was beating her, I'm not sure. And then he cheated on her. So at 16, in a drunken rage, Kim set his car on fire. She was 16. She did 14 months as a youthful offender. She got out, and she never committed another crime in her life. She got a degree in human services. She had a son who's now in middle school. Is she employable? She hasn't been able to get a job. Once they pull her criminal record, and it says 3rd-degree felony arson, it says felony property damage in excess of $5,000. She's gotten hired and has said, I have a criminal history. And once they pull her record, they say, we can't keep you here. She's 35. And I tell you this story because I do think she should be hireable. I think that any HR person who looks at her degree and looks at when that happened even though arson sounds pretty scary. But if you don't talk to her and hear, and again, I'm not justifying it. It was awful. But she did 14 months for that. That awful behavior had an awful consequence, and she paid it. Would we want to get a speeding ticket in December, pay for that speeding ticket in December, and every month after that, for that same infraction, we have to continue to pay for it? That's what happens to reentering people. You are constantly paying for something that you did and that you paid for. And it just really, really isn't fair. At some point, we have to be true advocates of second chances. Again, if you're a drinker and you're like really, 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 really stringent, I don't know how many of us is just maybe just one glass away from like, you know what, we really shouldn't be behind this wheel. But those things happen. People make bad judgments, they make mistakes, and we have to understand that. And again, I get that you have to work within the policies of your clients, but a criminal history should not be a blanket exclusion. And I would like to see the HR world use that as an indicator for conversation. That's what a criminal history means, is that this person I need to talk to. If they have every qualification that we need. So Kim's story, she got hired as a case manager. She was so excited because she had just graduated the year before. But they pulled her criminal history. And she's now, doing some bookkeeping for a relative. But my point is that we've got to be open to understanding that this is an untapped resource. So you have these vacancies, and you have these people who are dying to work, and they would be so excited to be given a chance because they understand how rare it is that they can come into a position that is not something that is just general labor. So what are we doing here in Greenville about reentry? As she mentioned, when I started this company back in 2011, I didn't know who my partners were because when I would look, I didn't see any specific group of resources for reentry. So I went to the United Way, and I met with Tamala Spann, who at the time was the vice president of community engagement. And I said to her, what's going on with reentry? And she said, we've been asking that question because they've just done a study on the White Horse Corridor, and they found in the homes that they were studying that there were people there that they called the unattached adult male in these homes. He wasn't related to anyone, but what they found is that these were people who were reentering people who couldn't find housing. So they were living with friends and relatives. They couldn't find employment. And she was like, we're asking who's servicing these people. So as a result of that, we developed the Upstate Reentry Coalition of a group of all the providers who do anything for people in reentry. And we're trying to basically focus on the main obstacle, which is employability, which is employment and resources. We're trying to make sure that we have the people that we're connected to, the agencies, are ready for you. They're ready for the vacancies. They have case managers and support. They have good behavioral soft skills. They understand workplace ethics, and they're ready. So on that sense, I'm going to bring up Joe Brewer, who is one of our U.S. attorneys here in Greenville. And again, reentry is a national issue and a national concern, and part of what he does through the U.S. Attorney's Office is focus on community safety, focus on reentry, and how to, I'm going to let him explain it. Thank you, Joe.
Good morning. My name is Joe Brewer. I'm with the U.S. Attorney's Office. I'm going to kind of introduce myself in sort of a couple capacities, and then I'm going to kind of allude to some things, but it's going to be kind of an abbreviated allusion, and I hope at some point that I maybe can come back, Caroline, or I might run into some or all of you all at under some other circumstances, G-SHRM or some other related organization. So just by way of background for me, I actually worked for Hunton and Williams out of their Charlotte office and their labor employment team years ago, and then I've also been with the federal courts, and a lot of employment work, as you know, is run through, a lot of employment litigation is run through the federal system, and so I wouldn't say that employment or hiring consultation is my expertise, but I have a lot of context for it that precedes my current role in the criminal justice system. I'm a U.S. attorney now, and that I'm sure you all have heard that phrase before, but it may have not any particular meaning to you. But the U.S. Attorney's Office prosecutes federal crimes. So you've probably heard of a district attorney or a solicitor, and that's the same. That's sort of the state analog to a U.S. attorney, and they prosecute state crimes. And your interface with criminal justice is probably folks matriculating out of the state system, because that's most of the individuals. But unfortunately, it's kind of the same population, and they are moving from, the juvenile system to the Youthful Offenders Act, and these are things that may or may not have any meaning for you, to the state system and to the federal penitentiary. And so it's the same group of people we're talking about. And to that end, the Department of Justice has taken a very global interest in this issue of reentry or returning citizens, because it's not just folks coming out of the federal system; it's sort of the entire population. And so the first introduction I'd like to make is sort of on behalf of my office. The Attorney General, Loretta Lynch. And again, these are ideas and names that are like in the ether, but you may not have any specific reason to know anything about them. But Loretta Lynch is the Attorney General of the United States of America. She's essentially the most powerful attorney really in the world, certainly in the United States. Her predecessor was a gentleman by the name of Eric Holder. He was the first African-American Attorney General. And he promulgated about 3 years ago what's come to be known as the Smart on Crime initiative. And that initiative reprioritized prosecutorial concerns. So it said we care about national security, we care about violent crime, we care about white-collar crime, and we care about underserviced, marginalized communities, and we care about protecting those communities. And what that meant in kind of bureaucratic speak is we have, and Caroline alluded to this, we have over-prosecuted our communities. And it was an acknowledgement of that in a very longitudinal and historical sense. And the detail that Caroline didn't mention when she was giving the data on the current status of our incarcerated population is that has ballooned those numbers, that 2.3, 2.5 million of presently incarcerated people, the 6 million people that are on supervision. In 1970, we incarcerated 300,000 people nationally. So that number isn't just extravagant by international standards, it's extravagant by our own standards, and it's a product of, and you need to hear me because I don't really have a dog in this fight. I'm just, and in fact, I'm an extension of the legacy, of the law enforcement legacy that produced the result. It's a function of the way our laws were set up and the aggressiveness with which they were prosecuted. And it's produced a very severe toll in human capital and financial capital. And a lot of people arrive at this issue. You can get there any way you want to, and that's why it's become a pretty bipartisan issue. This isn't the progressive left running around. I mean, there's a good bit of that, but running around saying, you know, we injured communities and families. This is the right and the left saying this is unmanageable no matter how you get there. So whether you're compelled by sort of this humanitarian sort of moral sense, or whether you're compelled by a more economic sense, we have a real crisis in our criminal justice system. So the Department of Justice has said, the Caroline Caldwells of the world and the people at Voc Recap or SC Works and sort of in our governmental institutions and in the private nonprofit sector have sort of been banging their heads against the wall a little bit, saying these folks need help. We need to work on this reentry issue. Well, law enforcement has to be part of that because we're the most significant barrier to progress in this area. And so under the current administration and the leadership of the Department of Justice, we have this new mandate, and I have the real privilege of being part of the integration and the institution of that mandate here in the District of South Carolina on a statewide level. Sorry, I didn't wanted to say something. I'm here in the Greenville Division office, 55 Beatty Place, so I'm 250 yards away. I'd pause real quick. The U.S. Attorney's Office and law enforcement have done a lot of great things in this area for years. So this isn't my mantle that I've taken up, and I don't want to suggest that there's been complete imbalance in terms of law enforcement's concerns about these issues. But there certainly is an increasing awareness that we need to be active. And so, the first reason why I'm here today is just to say, I'm your local U.S. Attorney. The U.S. Attorney's Office cares about these issues from a community perspective and from an employment perspective, and we want to be a resource, and we're just trying to plug into what's already been going on and say we're here to sort of help, and I'll explain a little bit more how we can help. The second capacity for which I'm here is Caroline this is kind of where Caroline just left off. And so Caroline and Jerry Blassingame started this reentry council, and it was an attempt, as Caroline said, to sort of coordinate all these existing resources because everybody's sort of out kind of doing their own thing. And there's people in the job readiness space, there's people in the job placement place. And so they've had this reentry council for 2-3 years, however long y'all have been operating, about 4 years. And has done a lot of really great things. And in the process of their work, they decided to kind of develop a subcommittee that was a kind of a job readiness assessment apparatus. And this happened about the same time that I came on and started sort of connecting with folks. And independently, I had been looking at some models in some other states and some other jurisdictions about how to invite private industry to be aggressive in this space. And there are a lot of theories and ideas about how to do that. And I think the toolbox needs to be really diversified, and there can't be one strategy to cure this. So ban the box is one of those strategies, and there's a lot of philosophical debate about whether ban the box is the right route. But we've been having conversations. This is the part where I'm going to allude to something, but it's kind of half-baked, and I'm just going to leave it there. I want to plant the seed, and at some point, hopefully, myself and other people will come back with a lot more meat on the bones with respect to this. But I want to at least mention it to y'all. So Johns Hopkins University, did anyone happen to go to the Furman Summer Series last summer over the Raleigh Institute hosted? Because one of their personnel came down. But Johns Hopkins was sitting up near Baltimore, and they said, look, we've got a massive, but what they said is, where are our untapped human resource populations. Where are non-traditional resource populations? And they said, we've got this huge returning citizens population that's sort of disenfranchised and just sitting here. And they made an intentional decision to target that community. And they hired an ex-cop. They associated basically 3 organizations like Caroline's. They associated, and I don't know all the details, but they associated 3 or 4 sort of job readiness preparation organizations, sort of case management organizations. They hired an ex-cop, put him on the inside, and they did an internal vetting process, and they did a risk assessment, and they did this job readiness assessment, and then if those persons cleared their rubric, those individuals were able to basically apply in the blind. So it's sort of like a privately operated kind of ban the box, but with vetting, with sort of a vetting piece in between. And so I got to thinking, like, why couldn't we do that on a public scale? And so the subcommittee has been talking about creating basically kind of like a clearinghouse. It's a multidisciplinary subcommittee that has human resources people associated with it. It has area employment defense bar associated with it. It has law enforcement. I sit on it. It has state probation sits on it. Goodwill sits on it. A person from SC works. And the idea is to operate almost like a bond rating agency. And so people like, and you asked earlier about what sort of difference between any of this and voc rehab. The nice part about, so one of the issues is there's a bunch of resources and they're all kind of doing their own thing, like we talked about earlier. This subcommittee would kind of funnel those resources in a sense. So voc rehab does a great thing, Caroline does a great thing, and the subcommittee can sort of decide what are the holes in the person's sort of portfolio of job readiness. There was something else I was going to say about Caroline. I'll get to that. And so the subcommittee would act as, again, a bond rating agency that employers could sort of rely on for a certification of the employability of this individual. And I kind of want to stop there with it because I don't want to get too much more in the weeds. But one of the differences, one of the things that this would permit is the person would be submitted to the committee. The committee would give some sort of certification as to sort of the risk assessment of that individual, the job readiness of that individual, and an employer would sort of consider the inventory of the subcommittee. The referral would actually come from a case manager like Caroline. So she would refer one of her clients to our certifying sort of opportunity. That person would be certified, and Caroline would continue as a point of contact for that person after employment. And that's one of those things that one entity like voc rehab can't really offer. But it would be an ongoing relationship and point of contact for the employer. So I actually said way more about that than I meant to, because the last thing I want to sort of leave y'all with is you work for profit. Well, I actually don't know who y'all work for. Presumably, y'all work for profit-generating entities. And it never, as a matter of pure capitalism, it never serves your profit interest to target one population over another. The way you maximize your hiring strategies and ultimately your bottom line is to hire the best available individuals. And that is an immovable object in this conversation. You are not charitable organizations. And even when someone says all things being equal as between someone who has a criminal history and one that doesn't, in other words, with respect vis-a-vis all their other attributes, they're still not really similarly situated. There's a risk component to that you don't have in their other box. And so we have to find a way to invite you all in and make this advantageous from a business perspective. And we're still working on the narrative for that, but I'll give you three things. One doesn't really count. But the first is, and I've already alluded to this, we already bear the burden of this. And this doesn't really fit what I was saying. But there is a community cost. There's a community cost to this that your organizations bear incidentally. We certainly bear them it costs $29,000 a year to incarcerate a federal inmate. And those have, and besides the impacts like Caroline was talking about to families and communities, but there is a cost that we're all bearing on an individual and a corporate level that we can't really quantify, or quantify is not the right word. We can't really draw straight lines from. That's the first piece. The second is this is what John Hopkins has experienced. When the person is vetted and cleared right, and we're talking about the right population and the right group, you actually have a better. This is John Hopkins' experience. You can actually improve your retention numbers with this group because you are hiring from a group that actually is incentivized in loyalties in a little bit different way. Now, I'm confident there's a number of people in here that can give testimonials to different experiences, but that's why we're kind of trying to change a little bit of the model of how we go about identifying and placing certain people and helping people assess the type of person that the range of people in this box. The last part, and this is the part that I don't want to sound way out of touch, but I really believe in this part, and it butts up against this ban the box part a little bit. But I think as HR as hiring officers and then internal influencers, like we talked about this morning, there is business cachet for being in this space, or there can be, and that's what Google's realized. That's what Tom's has realized, that there can be cachet in being in this space that impacts your bottom line, that improves your bottom line. So instead of this being a seedy backroom negotiation where Caroline is begging people to be placed, that this be a public part of corporate culture. And that's real easy for me to say or to suggest because I don't bear the risk or the concerns associated with that. But I think Greenville is uniquely associated for there to be a safety in numbers approach where we get commitments from companies to come out and be public about this and say, we do this, we think it's good for business, and I think there's a way of doing this where people will patronize your establishments for your work in this space. It's going to be very industry specific, and it's a lot more. I understand it's a lot more complicated and nuanced than that. But I'm going to keep saying that over and over again to people because I think it can be part of the solution. The very last thing I'll say is I'd like to reinforce some of the things that Caroline said about the nature of risk. So one of the things that my office can do is we can help educate people about criminal histories, and we can participate in the assessment piece on some level. But people's criminal histories are a little bit of a black box, and what's on the paper. So there are two complicating factors. The one is what I already said. We've over prosecuted communities. So we've generated there's a certain percentage we've generated a felony record concern that really shouldn't have existed in the first place. And then the second is what's on the paper. In other words, what's in their criminal history is not all. In many instances, is not fully reflective of the story. And I'm again, I have no dog. I'm the person that puts people in jail. So when I tell you that, it's just the truth. And when I get the call, so you all probably get SLED checks and that kind of stuff, but I get what's called an NCIC, and that is a comprehensive criminal history report that's multi-jurisdictional. So wherever this person has been, there's a reporting agency that comes back. I can't read them. I can't read them. So there's no way. I mean, they're impossible to. I mean, just like literally physically reading the documents. And I don't want to get too specific, but I deal with. So in the federal system, if you have 3 prior violent felonies and you're caught with a weapon, you're considered an armed career criminal. Okay. Up until really recently, the burglary of a home unassociated with, or burglary of a building unassociated with any interaction with a victim, any use of a weapon, anything was considered a violent felony. The Fourth Circuit has spent the last 3 years debating what constitutes just the phrase violent felony. So there is, and none of that has anything to do with anything other than these are very unclear areas that people are being stigmatized by in really profound and permanent ways. And I would like to be a part of, in association with other people, helping sort of clear the air and space on this so that your organizations can make more clear-headed decisions about complicated hiring decisions. So thank you all. It was good meeting you, Caroline. I appreciate you associating me this morning.
I'd like to just say one thing. About 7 years ago, I partnered with Miracle. They have a population that fits this. And my personal history is that the turnover rate, the success rate of that referral source equals the turnover and success rate of good employees who refer good employees. So it is the best turnover rate you could get, and that was shocking. I really didn't think that would be the case, but that has been a fantastic partnership for 7 years.
That's really
So
good.
I do want to throw that out there that it does sound scary, and it was scary to us at the beginning, but there is that dedication, that appreciation that is unusual that comes with that, and a number of those employees have promoted through the ranks within our company.
I think there's a lot of anecdotal evidence of that. And the other thing is, like, just a lot of confirmation bias in this space, right? I mean, you're not going to retain everybody, and sometimes when we hire ex-offenders and they don't work out, we associate that with their criminal history as opposed to this is just another person that we've sort of lost. And so, and that's all. This is an oversimplification, but.
Thank you. I'm just going to close out, Jen, so you can. So I just want to thank you for the time. And Joe, again, thank you. I am so excited that he has come into this work. He has a very clear skill for dissipating the fog and kind of pinpointing us in a direction that's precise and clear in terms of servicing this population. And I just want to leave you all with a challenge, not only for you, but for your peers and the people that you talk to. Regardless of your policies, I'm going to just say I believe that you can get a few of these people into the fold. It doesn't have to be a complete program where we're going to hire 150. If you start with 1 or 2, just personally saying, I'm going to address the issues, I'm going to think outside the box for this group that I know is marginalized, for these 2 people who've come across my desk. I'm going to have that conversation because I really don't know what these charges mean. I mean, it says felony, but I mean, what does it really mean, and what was the story behind it? And how long ago did it happen? And what is their life like right now? Who are they right now in this interview? What can they tell me that they've done in their community? What can they tell me that they've done in their church? What can they tell me about their family? What can they tell me about their process of trying to reintegrate successfully? And then ask yourself this question, and how can I help? If one of you does that today or adds that to what you do in your hiring practices, then this talk was worth every minute. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Joe. Something that Caroline ended on is how can we help? And when we're going through the hiring process, it's a quick process. Something that Caroline said is take the time, assess the character. And I don't know if we do that with anyone, really. We have those quick, we have behavioral interview questions, but it's a quick process. And sometimes we're even measured on how quick that process can be. So it's something I want to dig into a little bit further on how can we assess that character. So thank you all for joining us today. Something I wanted to mention before we wrap up, there's a little flyer. Rob and I are doing a leadership and employment law session later this month, and it's on April the 21st. It's a series that we do at least a few times a year, looking at helping supervisors, leaders with identifying their leadership style, how to influence others, and then the second half of the day is focused on employment law. So if you have anyone who you think would like to attend that session, we'd love to have them join us. So thank you all.